You know, I think Jim Morrison said it best when he said, "This is the end. This is the end, my only friend. The end." For those of you not in the know already or have been living under a rock or in a cave, Laser Quest is no more. It's done. It's finito, folded, finished, toppled. There will not be any reopenings of any of the current centers that they still operate. There will be no future franchise North American centers. There won't be anything like that, to my knowledge at least. And as I'm sitting here drinking my gas station bought Chardonnay, I can't help but reminisce and remember a lot of the people back in the day, players that is, who would sing the praises of this company, saying they are doing what's best for business, appealing to their most profitable demographic, that, of course, being the birthday parties. And someone like myself who had been studying markets and have been studying markets since I can remember, trying to reason with these people and say, not quite. That's not exactly the best thing for business in the long term. In the short term, yeah, maybe. Okay. So here we are in the glorious aftermath of a company who literally took the whole farm, the whole house, bet it all on one horse, and then watched that horse break its leg and shit itself all over the racetrack. Here we are. You know, I used to be a really big proponent of laissez-faire capitalism. But over the years, something happened. Over the years, I gradually became more and more disillusioned, if you will, in the concept of unfettered capitalism. And if I had to trace it to one thing, it would actually have to be two main things that kind of got me disenchanted with capitalism. Number one, the state of professional wrestling. And number two, Laser Quest. Yeah, that's right. Not even the years and years of being trampled underfoot by the system itself and being a hourly wage worker and just that whole kit and caboodle. It was literally Laser Quest and professional wrestling. Two things I loved dearly. And having those things, well, basically being forced to having to watch those things being reduced to nothing but property and profit. That did it. From there on, I was no longer an anarcho-capitalist or even a Western libertarian. Being forced to watch as a profitable company that had a thriving undercurrent that was its member base, to watch them just kick it aside, to see this potential huge source of revenue, this huge source of value embedded in their own property and right in front of their own noses, and have them just swat it aside, just cast it away as if it was not relevant to the big picture. And boy, oh boy, I wonder where they're sitting now. Most of them probably not in their office chairs anymore, if I had to venture a guess. So this well of value, this undercurrent of profitability that I'm talking about, it was driven and cultivated exclusively by the members, by the players of the game, with the company doing nothing for that, doing little to nothing for that. I know there's a lot of people that want to, do this song and dance about, oh, look what they did for the NAC. They allowed it to happen. They allowed it. Aren't we just the luckiest and most privileged people to ever play the game of laser tag? This company allowed us to take our hard-earned money and give it to them. I suppose we should check our privilege, shouldn't we? Anyway, I digress. I'm sure you want me to pull this full circle here. What does this have to do with the unfettered capitalism thing? What does this even have to do with the professional wrestling thing? We'll get to that later. But in relation to that, here we have a player base which, in a lot of cases, in most cases actually, emptied their heart and soul, everything they had, into this game. not for any particular reason other than that they actually wanted to do it, but regardless, emptying their heart and soul into this game with no return other than bragging rights. And it's not even so much about getting anything in return, to go completely unacknowledged, not largely unacknowledged, just completely unacknowledged by the company that was the foundation for this game, and for all the money and profitability that we did at one point give them. And by the way, if you believe the Kool-Aid about this member base, the NAC not being a profitable thing, I got a bridge to sell you. Because it's not inherently on its own. It's not inherently on its own unprofitable. The things that made that unprofitable were not our fault. It was not the doing of the member base, of the player base. It was the doing and the execution by the company itself. Because one thing you got to realize, and this has been debated for years on the news groups, on LQ Arena, on the Facebook groups, every message board, there's always been some debate about, well, what could we do to improve our local member base? What could we do as a player base to grow our member base, to replenish it? And the answer is very little. And you never could. And a lot of people would argue against this, saying that, like, oh, well, it's a lot of what the reason this game is dying is stacking. It's the stacking, or it's the players chasing new members off. And, while that contributes to it, that's nickel and dime stuff. I'm not going to deny that. But the buck stops with corporate, and it always has. They're the ones holding all the cards, not us. We never had any cards to play. This was always them. The money, the purse, it was anything that was going to be invested into this game could only be invested into it by them. And they chose not to do that. So let's take it back around to that whole professional wrestling thing and why I brought those two things together. Now, if you're a professional wrestling fan, you probably already know the level of exploitation that goes on in this business. What happens to people, how there's no benefits, there's no retirement fund, there's nowhere for a lot of these guys to continue living after they've done, in the industry. And how that relates to this is the professional wrestling industry as a whole has always been built on exploitation. Exploitation of labor. I don't want to get all political and all, go into political theory here or economic theory, but there's no question that there's a degree of exploitation that goes into a business like that. And to any business, really. But where the two link up is this. Professional wrestling has always been a staple in American entertainment since basically the dawn of television. It's always been there. It's never been the hottest thing. It's never been the most profitable thing. But it's always been there, and it's been a necessary staple because when everything else is down, when back in the day when you used to have seasonal, programming, when you were in the off season and you didn't have any new programming coming out, but people were still watching TV, you always had professional wrestling there to keep a steady viewership, an influx of viewership, so you could still continue to sell ad revenue and that kind of thing. That's what the player member base was to Laser Quest, and this is not me formulating this theory in my head. This is not my headcanon. This was actually told to me by people who worked in the company, one being our general manager of our center, who had basically described the player base and the reason why it's at least semi-important for this reason. As it was directly described to me, we are the staple when all the other business is down, when the group business isn't there, when the birthday party season is low. The member business was always there. It was there on a weekly basis. It was, when was the member business really down? NAC off season? Not really, because there was a lot of players that weren't NAC players, and even some that were, who still played the lock-ins, still played on Tuesday nights. Maybe not as regularly, but we were always there. I'm sure you probably heard that the bread and butter was always the birthday business, and that is true. But the bread and butter is not the same thing as the profit margin. The profit margin, okay, let me try to explain this as best I can, because I don't know how well I can articulate it. But the profit margin actually doesn't come from what pays your bills. Your profit margin comes from what's left over. I think everybody can basically grasp that. That's basic economics. That's basic, that's sums right there. So what I'm really trying to say is the birthday parties are what paid the rent, kept the lights on, paid the employees, paid basically the overhead and everything else. The profit that was left over from those birthday parties was actually not that big if you broke down the numbers. What made the profit bigger? What was the padding for that profit? Believe it or not, it was the members. The members were actually that padding of that profit. We were the bonus check in a lot of cases. I mean, depending on the center, of course. That could be a lot different if you're talking about Mountain View. In most cases, profits, bonuses, they needed that padding. And the members were that padding. And this is how it was explained to me. Any consistent business is good business. Despite all the potential shortcomings that member bases had, and they had plenty. You had plenty of bad members. You had all sorts of situations. But the bottom line is, birthday party business, group business, and especially walk-in business, hell, that even was affected by the time of year and the weather and all sorts of different things. That stuff wasn't consistent. That went up, it went down. It was here one day, it was gone the next, then it was back the next day. But the member business, for the centers that actually had steady member bases, that business was always there. Regardless of the time of year, the weather, the general economy, the position of the moon. For the ones that had it, it was there. And just to qualify, at no point am I trying to say that a business like Laser Quest could have run solely on member business. That is not even remotely what I'm saying. I'm trying to point out the usefulness of having staple business like that. Just like the wrestling business was the staple of American television for decades. The member program was the staple that was always there to hold LQ up when the business went a little bit down. So in conclusion, I think I'm going to wrap this train of thought up by saying that my only goal in this particular train of thought was to try to finally lay to rest this canard of the burden of having a member base and the burden that this whole member program was, because while it came with its problems, it was what is considered in the business world to be staple business. So if we could, let's lay this canard to rest in its grave right next to Laser Quest itself.